Lando Norris has caused quite a stir with some comments he's given in the wake of his new McLaren deal, explaining why he wouldn't be interested in being Max Verstappen's teammate at Red Bull. I'm sure most of you have seen these quotes already. We'll put the highlights on screen for you now. This was given to Sky Sports over the weekend. The summary, really, the key point here was when Lando said, "It's not the best thing to do going against Max. It's not the smart move." Ben, I admire the honesty. What do you think, though, of the substance behind what Lando said?
Yeah, I think Lando's been a bit unfortunate to use the terms scared and it not being a question of being scared, because the whole rest of his answer is basically an admission that he doesn't think he's as good a driver as Max Verstappen. He talks about how difficult it would be for the Max of a couple of years ago to beat the Max of now. He talks about, can you be comfortable to go in there and challenge him straight away? Calls Max the best driver in the world. It comes across as an inferiority complex, basically. A bit like when children insist they're not scared of something, but actually they are. It comes across as, a bit of fear. This aura that Max has built around himself, it's kind of permeated the whole of the F1 paddock, I think.
Yeah, I was fascinated that he was that revealing, really. It's interesting that someone would think that and they would tell us. Obviously, Lando was keen to stress that it wasn't a case of being scared, but one of the things that has been called into question is this: does this show a lack of ambition? Ultimately, if you want to be the best driver in the world, should you be willing to go up against anyone in any car? I get the impression that Lando mentioned the Max of a few years ago versus the Max of now. I think the Max of a few years ago, if a world championship winning car was available to him, he wouldn't care who the teammate was. He would just go in there and steam in. So I was surprised by what Lando said. Scott, how did you feel about it?
I just thought it was quite rational, to be honest. I don't really think it evoked much sense of fear. I think the point you make there about what Verstappen would have done, I'm not convinced. I think pretty much every driver basically makes the decision that they think benefits them the most. And Verstappen, the example I would give for him is the winter of 2019 into 20, when he signed a new Red Bull deal, taking him through, I think, to the end of 2023 it was at the time. But Red Bull wasn't challenging for a championship then. The Mercedes was clearly the superior package. The Ferrari was arguably equally as competitive over a season as Red Bull. There were new rules sort of roughly on the horizon. Another team could have emerged, but I don't remember us having the same conversation about whether Verstappen was scared about trying to get into Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes or something like that. And I don't really feel like we've heard that about, Charles Leclerc renewing at Ferrari either. So I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because Lando's not won a race and there's just this element. I think
it's because those guys didn't say that. Lando's almost paying the price here for his honesty, isn't he? Max didn't say back in 2019, I'm signing here because I don't really want to go to Lewis Hamilton's team. Has Lando's honesty kind of undone him here?
Well, possibly a little bit, but at the same time, Lando hasn't said the words, I'm scared of going up against Max Verstappen. And that's how, for example, that's what Ben's inferred from those comments, when really all he's doing is laying out, actually, as an F1 driver, if you want to achieve the best things, you need to have a lot of things lined up, which is how it's been forever. I think I was racking my brains trying to think, when was the last time a driver, an established driver, established at the time that they made the move, went from a competitive proposition to another competitive proposition? You have, I think, Lewis, McLaren to Mercedes, but he was going into Nico Rosberg's Mercedes, which is not the same thing. Jenson Button going alongside Lewis Hamilton at McLaren, but that feels very much like the exception to the rule to me.
Button also said that he wouldn't like to go up against Verstappen, so even Button is scared a little bit, I think, of Max Verstappen. I take the point about the competitive landscape, but also you can throw that back and say, well, at the moment, Red Bull is the only guaranteed winning ticket. So Norris keeping his options open for that seat, if there's a possibility, kind of makes more sense than locking yourself into a McLaren team that hasn't won a race for ages.
But it's the most
why not back yourself? I think people are right to question where Norris's self-confidence is. We've talked him up as being one of the top 5 drivers on the current grid, but he's basically admitting he's not as good as Max and doesn't think he could beat him in his own team. But he smashed Daniel Ricciardo, who went into Vettel's Red Bull, took it away from him, and then got beaten by Max over a season, 2 seasons. Like, it's possible to do it. And Ricciardo's a much lesser driver than Norris. Like, Verstappen has destroyed a lot of teammates, but all of them have not been as good as we think Norris is. So I think it's just a case of we want Norris to back himself. Like Glenn said, if you believe you can be a world champion, you need to be prepared to go up against anyone in any circumstances. Not think, oh no, but I've got to have the right team, the right amount of time to get used to the car. The teammate's got to be the right person. Like, that's not a winning mentality being conveyed.
But that's what pretty much every world champion has done. You go into an organisation, you create a team, you get into a situation where everything is aligned around you. And I don't think what Norris said suggests he thinks he's an inferior driver to Verstappen. It's just it's weighing up the odds. It's, if I go into Verstappen's team where he's been that organisation's darling for basically a decade now. He's been at Red Bull Racing since 2016. He's their triple world champion. Red Bull doesn't have 2 sets of the very, very best mechanics and engineers in the paddock. So I'm sorry, but your best personnel within Red Bull Racing are going to be on the Verstappen side of the garage track side. So he, in addition to that, Verstappen knows absolutely everything about that car, about the way Red Bull works, all of the processes. The fact is you're not going to go there, and in that first season, you're not going to have. First of all, you're not going to have exactly the same opportunity to win as Verstappen. In reality, you'll be given equal equipment for sure, but he's going to go there on the back foot. So and he knows that from the start. The second element of it is like, we talk about it as the most competitive prospect, but that's the most competitive prospect right now. But when do we think that Norris was going to make this hypothetical move? It's not coming before 2026. At which point,
maybe 25, because like they need to replace Perez, don't they? Let's be frank. And a lot of the chat was about having someone to slot in from 25 into the new rules. So this is the thing. It's like Norris has locked himself into McLaren beyond the point at which he could definitely get into a winning Red Bull, because no one realistically thinks anyone's going to topple Red Bull before then. So
but McLaren
he's giving that up.
But McLaren said that Red Bull don't have the money to pay what they would need to, hypothetically.
I don't see why they would either.
So I don't think there's not a Red Bull on the cards until 2026, when the car and engine rules change completely.
Sure.
Red Bull's building its own engine. And I sincerely believe, with some of the narrative around this and the way it's almost being brushed under the rug, I don't think people understand how much work Red Bull's taken on in building its own engine for 2026. Like that could go so wrong. And I don't.
Yeah, but it could for Mercedes too, couldn't it? There's no guarantee McLaren's going to be a winning team in 26.
Yeah, but that's not the same. That's a false equivalency, because Mercedes have been around building F1 engines for a really long time and have conquered the hybrid era already. Okay, they might not be the out-and-out best anymore. I think that Honda's probably the benchmark, but I really don't see that it's not the same as, right, are you being offered that Red Bull seat for right here, right now? If that was the situation, I still think all of the stuff Norris says about Verstappen would have the advantage, certainly in the short term. All of that is still valid, but you know for sure you have a really competitive and more competitive option right now. But if you look at it in the short term, in the medium term, beyond just the short term, where McLaren's at, what Norris sees going on there, he sees a lot more than any of us do. The idea that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they can support the trajectory that they're on right now. I think you can definitely have more faith in a Mercedes engine for 2026 than you can a Red Bull powertrain. Sorry, a Red Bull Ford engine for 2026. And I think if he was trading that, and then if you trade that and you get to 26 and Red Bull goes back to the wilderness again, like it was in the early part of the hybrid era where it didn't have the right engine, then it's career suicide to do that.
But it's all ifs and buts, isn't it? It's if McLaren stays on the trajectory, which hasn't yet yielded a race win, they might be title contenders as a Mercedes customer. If you take Red Bull and the new Ford powertrains unit alongside customer McLaren, all bets are off. Like, one could get it right, one could get it spectacularly wrong, either for different reasons. I still think overall a bet on Red Bull is a safer bet because of the track record recently, and with Newey plugged in. Yeah, okay, you can say Max is more established in that team, but Norris is parroting this idea, a lot of things are built up around him, I think was the quote he used. Like, this is this is something we've challenged before, that it's like Max's team, Max's car, that it's all built around him. You and Ed Straw have spent a lot of time saying, well, actually, no, Red Bull builds the fastest car, and it's just that Max can get more out of it than most other people. This is what I'm saying. Like Norris, if he's a quality driver, someone's got to go in there and dethrone Max eventually. Back yourself to do it. The teammates that Max has destroyed are not on the level of Norris. So, but he seems to have ingested this idea that's on some level, Red Bull is Max's team and it's all built and geared towards him. And I'm not sure we think that's the case.
Let's move it on then. I think one thing that Lando's comments do suggest is, and as Scott said, this is kind of what we see always, is that teams and drivers feel like they have to build something up together. It feels like we're in an era now where nobody feels they can jump around as much and just change things. This is why we're seeing these long-term contracts coming out. Charles Leclerc's just signed a new one with Ferrari as well. Franchise drivers, effectively. But Scott, I wanted to get your thoughts on where this Norris-Red Bull link has always confused me. We've talked about it a lot at the race. Where does it come from? Because as far as I can see, if Lando Norris is as good as we think he is, he doesn't fit the profile for a Red Bull driver to be Max Verstappen's teammate. We said earlier, Red Bull wouldn't buy him out of an expensive McLaren contract. So where has this come from? Because either Red Bull don't think Norris is as good as we think he is, and they think he'd be a great number 2, or surely they would only sign him if they were looking for the guy they need after Max, if Max is going to walk away.
Well, I think part of it comes from the fact that it's a long-standing interest, and that's always kind of hard to shake. If something existed before, it can sometimes be the case in the F1 paddock that is how people think the situation is basically forevermore. Norris could have been in F1 as a Red Bull driver in 2019 because Red Bull, or even sooner, because Red Bull were interested in him when Brendan Hartley was in Toro Rosso and struggling. And it was that interest that played a big part in McLaren committing to taking Norris seriously as an option for a race seat in 2019. You remember they put him in the car in Friday practice I think it was in 2018 at Spa, and then I think it might have done Monza as well the week after. So they had an initial interest then. They've definitely made at least one or two, certainly tentative inquiries since then. I think the last concrete one before now would have been just before Norris did that new deal at the start of 2022 in February, the deal that preceded the one he's just done, the extension. So there's an existing interest, and it's also because he ticks a lot of boxes. He's very good. He's young. He gets on well with Verstappen. Technically, I think he'd be quite compatible with Verstappen in that we know that Norris has got good adaptability and seems to be able to handle a strong front end that creates instability at the rear, maybe a bit closer to the way that Verstappen can handle that. So I think in Red Bull's eyes, he's a very good option. But I sincerely believe that Red Bull think that the only driver who would cause Verstappen real trouble over a full season is Lewis Hamilton. I think Hamilton's the one that Red Bull would prefer to avoid having as the teammate. I think that they look at the other drivers of his generation, Leclerc, Norris, probably even George Russell, and think Verstappen would beat him.